Welcome back to the CMASC podcast, everybody. I'm here with Will and Tim, my intrepid pioneers, and today we're going to be talking about agreeableness and disagreeableness, which is something that I've spent a lot of time considering over the last 2 years, both before I returned to the church and shortly thereafter, because the church is often maligned as being comprised of a bunch of agreeable doormats for the men and often domineering women or more disagreeable women. And so it wasn't particularly enticing for me to want to return to the church with that perspective in mind. So I want to go over that with Tim and Will, and then touch on a little bit of what our duties as a man are in being agreeable or disagreeable, specifically with respect to clergy and the current papacy, and then in things like business and marriage as well. What kind of disposition do we as Catholic men are we supposed to have? What's moral? What's immoral? Can you sin by having a certain personality or expressing or emphasizing certain personality traits? These are all things that me as a 25-year-old have thought a lot about. Because, you know, your personality is malleable. It's something that you can, personality is malleable and virtue is something that's trainable. And so it's something that we can grow in if we recognize a deficiency. So to get started, I often prepare for these shows and I have a bunch of questions, but I would love to try and keep this a bit conversational, even though I'll guide it with some of the questions. But just to start, I'm going to define agreeableness so everybody's on the same page. It's a personality trait that can be described as cooperative, polite, kind, and friendly. This is from Psychology Today.
I disagree with that.
Okay. Oh, I just got the joke. All right.
You're like, me too. Will's like, me too. Let's all disagree.
Okay, I'm wrong. I'm sorry, I'm wrong.
I was thinking that already.
People in agreeableness are more trusting, affectionate, altruistic, and generally displaying more pro-social behaviors than others. People high in this pro-social trait are particularly empathetic, showing great concern for the welfare of others. They are first to help those in need. Agreeableness is one of 5 dimensions of personality described as the Big Five. So I think right off the bat, our instinct is to say, like, yeah, but I can be disagreeable and still be kind, polite, and friendly and empathetic and all these things like that. So just so that we're all on the same page, starting with you, Will, and then Tim, what do you mean when you say agreeable?
I think a lot of this is actually to do with what in other spheres is called frame. Like a guy who's disagreeable is likely to have strong frame. So you're more inclined to stick to your principles at the cost of being willing to be friends with people and compromise over the truth. So on these agreeableness tests, I scored pretty high. I took one of the big ones and came out as 99th percentile disagreeableness, which means that pretty much nobody's more disagreeable than I am. And I was thinking about what that means, and I'm known for getting in all sorts of arguments, and one of the reasons I got fired, and probably one of the reasons that Tim got fired as well, is because if someone says, look, let's just roll with this idea, it doesn't matter if it's true or not. I'm normally the first to say, but is it true? And if it's not, then I'm not going to roll with it, because I care more about that than pretending to have this fake friendship or fake alliance based on a lie. I don't want to compromise my integrity like that. So for me, I would say that they've smuggled into that definition that you've read out ideas about kindness that most top minds from the past wouldn't actually agree with. You're not being kind to someone by letting them get away with falsehood. That's actually being unkind to them. You should deal with the fact you've got to inflict intellectual pain and sorrow on them in the short term to disabuse them of that. And people actually need people like that in their lives. That's true kindness.
Yeah, Tim, you were nodding the whole time.
Because I agree. But I agree that on your little test you sent along last night, Nick, for agreeableness, I ranked off of the chart. Like, Steph and I were laughing in bed because I took the test, and it was just like, you take the panel of questions, and then you send away your results and you wait 5 seconds, and then the website was like, came back to us like a doctor after a panel of tests, and it was like, so as you suspected, you are guilty of disagreeableness. It's funny because I was like, is that all it's going to tell me? I already knew that based on basically everything Will just said. Applied to myself.
Yeah, I was hoping it gave like a percentage or something. Just for perspective, I got average agreeableness, and I don't know if that's 50% or like 30 or what.
Yeah,
but it's definitely likely the case. Now, okay, so even though I have an outline, I'm already coming up with more questions. So, for example, if you guys were to look at the last roughly 3 decades, or even 4, yeah, we'll say like the first 10 years of your life as well. Has it been relatively a constant trend, or did you have to train to maintain the frame, which I think is a really great way of putting that, Will?
For me, it's always come relatively naturally, and I was the kind of kid who would get sent out of class in school for disagreeing with the teacher about something and sent to the principal's office, and then he'd say, like, you know, you're intelligent. I can see why you're interested in ideas, but it's not always the time and the place for it. I'd be thinking, no, it is the time and the place, because we're here to discuss ideas in the classroom. That's what it's for.
Yeah.
So there's been that even back to when I was younger. And then I think part of it is to do with the fact that the more seriously you take the life of the mind, and the more intellectual matters concern you, the more likely you are to put those ahead of other things. Like, some people aren't that bothered about that, and it doesn't really matter to them much whether they have a disagreement with someone over a point of principle. But it's funny because most people will fall out over, you know, he owed me some money. But you can see even in leftist intellectuals that if someone crosses a particular dividing line in terms of belief, or is inconsistent in the worldview, then they'll kind of cut people out. You notice that? I think that's part of what cancellation is about. So they'll pretend that it's about kindness and agreeability, but they'll show the very same disagreeability and unwillingness to be social and actually exile people when it suits them. So I think it's important to recognize that even the people who talk most about everyone getting along and let's all join hands and sing Kumbaya, they know when to be disagreeable too.
Yeah, I agree. I'm gonna smile every time I say that. I agree with everything Will said. Yeah, this is what does Will Ferrell say in Step Brothers? This is a way of life. Like, this is a choice, and being this disagreeable. I remember I think it was 4th grade in Mrs. Elrod's homeroom class. It was St. Patrick's Day, and she'd planned evidently to like surprise us with a little leprechaun. So she like it was at the end of the day, and she turned the lights on for a second, and she'd placed a little like leprechaun doll somewhere, and then she turned him off, then she turned him back on. And I saw her in the dark like move him, and everyone in the class, there was like a gang, lynch mob working against me, because they were all like, oh, it's real. I saw it and I was like, no, trust me, Miss Elrod just came over here when she switched the lights off. Like, why do you think she did that? She moved the leprechaun, and I saw her. It was right near my desk, dude. And they were all like, no, it's St. Patrick's Day. It's the magic of leprechauns. And I was like, yeah, that's not a thing. Like, you're in 4th grade now. Like, get your head in the world. Like, this isn't 3rd grade anymore, people. And the whole class was upset. You know what? It was 2nd grade. It was Mrs. Coates' class in 2nd grade. Sorry. And Mrs. Coates, who was a pretty 2nd grade teacher, by the way, so I really had to stand my ground because I had a crush on her. She was like, she always called me Timmy. She's like, Timmy, come on. And I was like, no, Mrs. Coates. Like, this is about right and wrong. You're lying to the people right now. So I've always stood my ground in, pre-middle, 4th, 5th grade, when you're getting more like the friends that you're going to have going into middle school and adolescence. I was always the leader of my group of friends, and again, it was always there's always some moral basis there going into adolescence, and a lot of times we got into like trouble, like.
And I'll get into that with respect to the fights here soon, because I do want to I do want to talk about that. But it sounds to me like disagreeableness in all of the best ways is a composite between fortitude and courage. Would you guys agree? Does that sound roughly accurate? Yeah.
And you probably got the vice by excess, which is surly. If agreeableness is loosely related to affability, which is the social virtue of being basically friendly and polite, then the excess would be being the deficiency would be being surly, when you're not affable enough. And if you're too disagreeable, although a little bit is good, you're going to end up surly too, and just starting fights for the sake of it. Like with courage, that can tip over into rashness, for example, being foolhardy, not really caring about exposing yourself to danger. So I definitely think, like everything else, you can push it too far, and sometimes it's a struggle for me not to respond or not to get into the argument when it doesn't really matter, because I'm naturally inclined that way to just pick the fight, and I enjoy it. Like, I don't have to be coaxed very hard into doing it because it's fun for me. A bit like some of the dog breeds that are meant to hunt things or fight things. It's just what they want to do. So I have to be careful with it.
Now, that is often heralded as a real man never backs down from a fight, and Will, you wrote a Substack about why being disagreeable is not inherently masculine. Generally speaking, it's not inherently masculine. Can you summarize why that is?
We are social animals, and we're built for life in community, and we want affability because it's like social lubricant. So you want to try and get along with people where you can. So the default should be that you're going to be friendly. This is where I got a slight problem, in that I don't think agreeableness and affability are exactly the same thing. And in general, probably the spinelessness that we see in so many institutions and in the church and among men generally today is due to them being too agreeable. So I'm not going to suggest that people should come away with this thinking that we need less disagreeability. We probably need more, but it's certainly got a downside to it. And you've got to bear in mind that you're a social animal. With Aristotle, the man who lives outside the city is either a beast or a god. We're neither. So we need other people around us, and that means we need to be affable, we need to be agreeable. But you've also got to recognize that truth is like the ultimate social virtue. And you can be put in a kind of society where just by sticking to the truth, and I think this happened today, and there are other times where I don't think Tim would be coming across as a disagreeable person, because you wouldn't have people saying retarded things around you the entire time that you had to disagree with. It's just that the overall, the window is shifted so far that just by sticking to what the faith actually teaches and trying to uphold it, you just get disagreements constantly. Right. You can just leave the house and then you hear absurd stance after the next, wherever you go, whatever school, whatever newspaper you pick up, whatever casual conversation someone starts. And you can just cave and let it all wash over you, but that isn't for your spiritual benefit or the people that you're speaking to either.
So it sounds like, it's in the word, agreeableness is to just agree with whatever the strongest pressure in the system is, right? To sort of go with the flow. Affability feels aligned with or resonant with magnanimity and liberality, right? And so you can be disagreeable, which is to say have fortitude and stand your ground and be a very kind, friendly, outgoing person, which I think describes both of you. But Will, what you just said is true. Like when Tim will hold the ground on annulments, people are like, "Oh wow, what an asshole! Who does he think he is? This is arrogance. This is disrespect of the magisterium," or 100 different insults thrown. And it's like, well, at no point did Tim do more than like a pithy joke. He wasn't insulting or stabbing or going for the throat. He was just literally speaking the truth. And same with you with patriarchy and Eaton and all these things. So yeah, that's kind of an interesting distinction. Tim was Christ agreeable, disagreeable? Was he affable? Can you give like a personality breakdown from the scripture of how you would characterize Christ?
Christ was magnanimous. And remember, in Aristotle's in Aristotle's virtue ethics analysis, magnanimity is the only virtue which is situate on a 4-metric planar scale. Most of the virtues are just a 3-metric planar scale, where, courage is the geometric mean, meaning it's not situated exactly halfway between vice of deficiency, cowardice, and the vice of excess, rashness, right? So it's 3. You're one of 3 to some degree. You're either some degree short of courageous, meaning you're somewhere in the realm of the vice deficiency of cowardice, or the vice excess of rashness, more or less, or you're right on the bullseye. There's only one way to be right on the bullseye, and that bullseye is closer to rashness than cowardice. Well, with magnanimity, remember, magnanimity involves 2 virtues at once, because it's the name of the virtue is, do you, and I think this is what all of this is about, do you claim your proper share of honor? Well, in this case, of course, magnanimity is the name of the virtue, meaning the golden mean. It means you deserve much honor and you claim it. You can also be vain, where you don't deserve much honor, and yet you still claim much honor. You claim more than you're due. That's why it's a justice matter, giving to each his due. Or you can be pusillanimous, where you're owed more honor than you claim, which modern Christians assume Jesus would have been pusillanimous on Aristotle's scale, and he actually wasn't. This is why when he stood before the Sanhedrin, they're like, are you the Son of God,
right,
the divine Son of God? And he was like, if you say so. Christ was super magnanimous. The modern cucked Christian thinks magnanimity is not Christian, and pusillanimity is. Now, the only other, the 4th metric here that's kind of off the charts is, well, what if you aren't owed much honor, but you don't claim much honor? Aristotle says, then you're not really in the running for magnanimity, but at least you're not making a breach against the virtue of justice and magnanimity. He calls this like meek or modesty. I think modesty,
yeah,
meekness, something like that. But so Christ was really magnanimous. He never said, no, I'm not the Son of God. I should probably be humble here. He remember also the Judas protocol, when expensive oils are being used to cleanse him by the woman. And Judas comes and he's like, we could sell that and give it to the poor. Jesus literally is like, you'll always have the poor. I'm a big deal.
That's a really good point, yeah.
Christians don't get it. Like literally, purple garment, yes. Expensive oils and unctions, yes. That's because I'm the Son of God. I'm a really big deal. I'm not going to pretend it's otherwise. That would be unjust and dishonest and pusillanimous. But there was another aspect of what Will said that I wanted to respond to. I'm forgetting what it was. Anyway,
I'll prompt you with
jump in if I do. Yeah,
with something else, and maybe it'll dislodge that thought, which is there's so many ways to go here, but because you brought it up, we'll address this. That Yep. Like I said at the start, I was hesitant to re-enter the Catholic faith because it seemed like it was full of a bunch of pusillanimous people, pussies.
It seems like there's a shortening that makes sense.
Yes.
There. A bunch of pusillanes.
Pusillanes. Yeah, and
that's what Christians seem like.
And I'm like, well, y'all don't want to fight. I want to fight. There seems to be a lot of really important things to fight for while we're alive here. But you guys keep saying things like, my kingdom is not of this world, and you guys sort of want to check out and get steamrolled. And obviously that's incorrect, but maybe you guys could describe that error and like what a true Catholic disposition would look like as a man.
Oh, I just remembered, and I can merge it into that answer.
Go for it.
With a clever bit of witchcraft. So all three of us are actually quite affable, at least with each other. Like we have great chats and like natural camaraderie. Some guys don't know how to do camaraderie. Like I've been in debates with other Christian guys where you're just like, in between questions or something, you're like, what are you doing this weekend? And they're like, I'll do several things, thank you. Yeah, it's like, that's not affable. Like, if you talk to me, I'm fierce competitor in basketball. That's where I'm most competitive, and that's where like half of my fights I've ever tallied up took place on a basketball court that turned into fist fights. But you still could talk to me in between free throws if you're on the other team. I'll probably be fighting you at some point that game, but like, when I was a young man, I still will talk to you. And with my friends that I like, I'm affable, and that's how you two are as well. But I'm surprised that your disagreeability score isn't higher. Well, that your agreeability score is so high. It disappointed that part of me. No, I'm just kidding. Like, we're all affable, but disagreeable. We should talk about our sub-scores really quickly. Anyway, I think that's how the Christian should be, to answer the question full circle.
Yeah, it feels like that, and that's sort of what you want. And like the classical man is one who's going to be friendly with you, but you're never going to be able to push him over. You can go up to him and you can push on him, and he's going to hold his ground, but he's never going to like smack you, unless you're being a little twat, and then he'll smack you. But for the most part, it's
because that's kind.
Okay, yeah, exactly, because that's kind, right? The spare the rod, spoil the child sort of thing. It's like, no, this is good for you. Don't, because I, as a patriarch, and that's one thing I do want to get into in a little bit is the patriarchy aspect of the church, because it started to click with me that the exchange of matriarchy for patriarchy, or vice versa, was sort of the undoing of a lot of this, and why I think a lot of young Christian and Catholic men are far more pusillanimous. They are timid, and the last thing that they want to do is rock the boat, especially with like female teachers in school. Like, it's all female teachers, Catholic school, Christian school. And it's like, well, that's my mother, right? This woman teaching me is my mother, and I'm not supposed to say an ill word toward her or rock the boat or anything like that. But before we get into all that, because that's a very interesting rabbit hole, I'm curious how many fist fights, each of you have been in, if you could tally. This is the real disagreeableness test, not anything on Psychology Today.
I heard Gavin McGinnis say he's like, everyone thinks I've been in a lot of these, and I've only been in, he said, like 12 or 13. I was totaling mine up. I think mine were 8. I did this recently, like 8 or maybe 9. I've had my nose broken 3 times. So, I don't know, whatever that means. But the point is, yeah, I've been in enough to have had my nose broken 3 times, and been in several that Steph saw, even as a young man. I got in a giant fist fight in a South Dallas gym with a gang of probable Democrats in a South Dallas basketball gym. Huge fight. on the day I graduated college. So in my pictures, I have a broken nose and a big thing because one of the guys on the other team nearly stepped on Steph's hands, and they were trying to fight everyone. So anyway, me and my older brother and a couple of my friends, one of whom is like a BJJ grand wizard of the ancient Orient or whatever. He had a guy in reverse guard and was just choking him out. I was fighting two guys because they had a number on us, and I think that's the last one I've been in. But I got in far too many in college through either basketball or playing in the band. There's just a lot of street action, and again, you never back down. Anyway, sorry, Will, you can say your
I probably had about the same as a kid. I'm thinking between 5 and 10 when I was young, and then did a couple of years of MMA training, and then just did lots of fighting through that, obviously. I actually quit that because I hit one of my friends in the head too hard, and he felt really sick for a couple of days. And I was like, you know what? I don't want to hit anybody in the head anymore, because he's my friend, and he had to miss out on an interview for university that was the next weekend. I was thinking that was no point. So I quit that and then just did it in the gym instead, because it's a good way to get out some aggression. And since, the age when it actually can wind you up in jail if you get into a fight, I just haven't done anything. I just always walk away from it. And I haven't even been like challenged or come close to being in a fight. I've been in a bar couple of times, and a friend has bumped into someone and they've been about to go at it, and then just walked up and managed to calm it all down. So that's my preferred method if possible. Just try and calm it or walk away.
Yeah, the stories are never as cool as you think. It's never like, let's fight over the baby slain in abortion. Like, like the people that like that never fight. Like literally one of the last fights I got in before then, only a couple years before graduation, was we were in a bar and a bouncer called me Creed. That Gaylord singer Scott Stapp from Creed. Everyone used to say I looked like that guy. And my older brother, who's like a PhD in like science, really smart guy. Yeah, I was normally the one getting us into shit, but he's like, no one calls my brother Creed, and we had to fight like 3 bouncers. I tried to diffuse that one by like doing a dance off, and the bouncer kind of smiled and then just like took a bitch shot, and I fared well in that one. My brother did not, and because he was very toasted, and it was totally out of character for him to do that. And normally it was me, but the point is, they're never good stories. It's never like a great story like I stood up for the honor of Our Lady in Mother Church against a band of orcs with upside down crosses. It's never like that. Yeah. It's always like you're in a bar, someone's being a dipshit. A lot of times that someone was me, full honesty, with a big mouth, and then whatever happens, or you're in a basketball gym, and people who probably vote Democrat, maybe they detect that I was a Republican or something somehow. But those are the ones that are more meaningful, because it's like someone will, because you're a white person who excels a lot at the game of basketball, you catch a lot of shit, which I did, particularly in places like South Dallas gyms where I played a lot. And, they make a racist remark, and that's something that's supposed to piss us right off. But really quick, to keep it conversational, can we go through our facial scores or our subfacet scores? I wanted to hear Will's. I'm guessing they're the same as mine, but I wanted to hear yours, Nate.
Yeah, go for it, Will.
Okay, so mine is, I was shocked to learn I'm low in agreeableness. The first other metric is, sorry, it's a screen record and I went slow so I thought you were going to be asking us about this. So very shocked to learn I'm low on agreeableness. I was high on my level of trust for other people is low. My level of honesty is high. My altruism is high. So look at me. Don't you feel whatever? My level of cooperation is low. My level of modesty is low. My level of sympathy is average, though, so C. And Dr. John A. Johnson made the quiz. What did you guys get on those 5 facet scores?
I only saved my one, which was rating me on the how agreeable I was, and that one just gave me a low. But the other one sounded pretty similar to what you had, Tim. The one that made me wonder was on was it the empathy or sympathy, whichever one it was. I was wondering how they'd measured that one, because, people will sometimes say, like, thanks for all the free content that you make, or thanks for helping me out with the question for free. And I was thinking, well, that's to do with empathy, because I can tell when someone's really struggling intellectually or spiritually. I want to help them out. But I'd come across as quite low, I think, on that score. So again, I was wondering how they define the terms, and I'd probably disagree with their definitions, just like I do with what it means to be kind.
Because you're disagreeable, by the way.
Yeah, that is it. And I was disappointed I didn't get a percentile for the agreeableness, because the other one I did, when it said I was more disagreeable than 99% of people, that one gave me some relief. It just helped me out to know that. Like, that's it. So, that's why I get into trouble sometimes.
So you're disagreeing with the way they administered the exam.
I'd have done it differently.
I'm with you. And Steph actually was mentioning this. We did a live stream yesterday on 12 retarded things that Christian feminists will say to, especially her, but will say to her or I. It was a good show. And she mentioned in passing, she's like, everyone thinks we're all mean, she was saying. But Steph's like super affable. She's just like us. She's disagreeable about stupidity, but she's like, we respond to so many things. She's like, Will responds to so many guys helping. So she kind of brought this up, not even knowing we were doing a show. It's like, disagreeable does not actually mean you're an a-hole. It tends to mean the opposite.
Right.
And I would guess your level of altruism, that's one of those Freudian words I hate, but what they mean is sympathy or even meekness. A badass can be meek. And I think you would be high on that, Will. And I was laughing when you were talking about you hit your head and you gave him the system reboot or the factory reset, because you look like if you hit someone, they might explode. Like, I was smiling. I'm like, you probably, like, I can hit hard. I can throw a hard right. Nick's seen me on the bag, but like, it would be a fearsome thing to see you hit someone in the head. I would worry for that someone.
I've been to, like, powerlifting competitions. I'm really small compared to some of the guys there, and they're like, bench 550, deadlift 800, 850, weigh 260, 270. They don't get in any fights. They're like really gentle. They're just like big bears that sit around and eat and lift. And like, how many fights you been in? None. I never want to be in the fight. And I had a guy who I trained with who was about 6'5", 6'6", and he weighed nearly 300. And he used to walk around just going to clubs at night. And then, I don't know if you have gypsies in the US, but we have gypsies in the UK. They're just like traveling people who like to fight a lot. It's part of their culture.
Pikeys.
And he'd just walk around, and they'd just appear out of nowhere and just say, do you want to fight? Do you want to fight? And no, I don't want to fight you. And they'd like end up shaking his hand, taking a photo with him, because they'd met someone really big, and they just loved that. But he would never dream of fighting them. So it's always stuck with me.
Wow.
We don't have gypsies, but we do have illegal immigrants from the South. They're our equivalent.
We do have Chicago and Baltimore and Ferguson and so I scored honesty high, trust average, altruism average, cooperation average, modesty low, sympathy low. I really do think that the percentages would be a lot better. I just clicked on like the first test, and I was hoping to get like some reference point there. But I've been in exactly 0 fist fights, and I've actually been punched in the nose. It was kind of by accident, but kind of on purpose. Once at a swing dance event, and if I look back at my entire life, it seems to be starkly in contrast to both of yours with respect to that. My dad taught me something when I was young. There was some exercise equipment in our basement, and I was going to start using it. I was very, very young. We were probably less than 10 years old. And he said, it's better to carry a big stick quietly than a small stick loudly. And it was one of the very earliest things he ever taught me. And so that moment, and then there was one moment where my sister and I were starting to argue about something. And for whatever reason, I don't remember, I became very stoic and I let her escalate into emotion. And after the argument, my dad complimented me and said that because of the stoicism, because of my disposition, I had won that argument. And basically both of those moments, I think, characterized how I approached every conflict from then on, which is I take the path of least destruction. And 99 times out of 100, that's a really great heuristic to live by. Because why would you want to break more things? And I see so many men who just try to hurt the situation. They try to inflame the situation to demonstrate capability, and it's never productive. And I think I always was willing to take it on the chin and become smaller in the eyes of people or the situation or the hierarchy in order to permit productivity, especially in my career. I've done that a lot where I just knew. Now I was always principled. I wouldn't lie. I wouldn't roll over on things that like really meant something, but I wouldn't just try to piss on the ground and say, this is my territory, don't cross into it. But I do feel like I do wish that I've been in fist fights. Like I think I've said that to you, Tim. Like I really just want to get into a fight. There's something that feels right about like that kinetic warfare of fighting. And I remember when I interviewed Gavin McInnes, he said that there's 4 things that a man needs to do in order to become a man. He needs to get laid, get his heart broken, break a heart, and get in a fist fight. And I don't know that I necessarily agree with those 4, but that always stuck with me, that like you got to get in a fist fight. But when we're contrasting these things, do you guys have any thoughts on the tension between holding frame and getting in the way of productivity, of building? Because guys can get in their own way for years, for decades, because they're too proud to just let things build. They're like, well, but I'm not going to roll over my principles. It's like you're not being principled. You're just being a douche. You're just being a douche.
Yeah. Like I think your self-characterization now and at other times where it's come up is always really accurate, Nick, and I think Will's is too, for the record. But yeah, when you're saying, oh, I haven't been in a fight, and there are times in my career, and I know some of the times you're talking about, that I chose the path of least destruction. That's really aptly said. It's not the path of least resistance. I mean, go look at your track record for the subject matter of your 6 films. That you're always taking on a big bear. You're always speaking truth to power. But what folks out there don't realize, what the normies and the semi-normies don't realize, is how much bureaucratic hassle is behind the scenes. And they might have heard about that from reading People magazine, about movies getting made. But what's behind the bureaucratic hassle is giant, stupid egos of many. But basically every individual constituent in the bureaucratic machine is its own giant ego. There are very few sensible people that run bureaucratic gatekeeping machines like Hollywood or DC or whatever. And so it's actually the whole is actually less than the sum of its parts when you tabulate ego with a bureaucracy machine like Hollywood or getting stuff done in the arts. And it's not always in Hollywood. Sometimes it's in the Southeast. Nick, you know what I'm talking about. So yeah, taking the path of least destruction, as you fairly characterized it, as you've always done, is very different from taking the path of least resistance. And so I think I just wanted to say that's not a cope. And there is something probably semi-important about getting in a fight. Actually, Gavin McInnes's 4 line items there. The Christian might not like it. Oh, well, you're saying I can't become a true man till my wedding night if I do everything right. Well, yeah, I think that's even fair. I've heard him say that, and I don't think that's far off. But I also don't think that. I think that the fist fight could be surrogated by other things, like what you do for a living. Other guys go to a 9-to-5 cubicle and keep their mouth shut about even, maybe they voted for Trump in 2016 or 2020. You punch in totally different work week, and everything you do is a fight. It would be ridiculous and jejune if now you sought to adequate some blocked wish, like, oh, I should have gotten in more fights when I was 17, 18, maybe 19. So I'm going to go do it now. I mean, that's called a midlife crisis. So you can surrogate in other more important ways. And I've told you and Scott and Tom, all guys your age who we're all close. Yeah, aside from maybe one category, you guys are more mature than I was. Even though I was married at 25, but in some ways I was always very committed to Steph, and I was always very committed to leadership. But my leadership of my friend groups when I was 18, 19, 20, 21 was always more rudderless. It was like, let's go mock this group of people, or do a prank or something, or get into hijinks. That's worthless compared to what you're doing. So I just wanted to say that.
Much appreciated.
Yeah. Agreed. And also, for any guys listening who haven't been in a fight, like Gavin McInnes getting in a fight would not look as cool or as masculine as you imagine. Don't worry, you haven't missed out on much. The other point is that I want to read out something from Cardinal Newman, the famous Anglican convert to Catholicism. I think he really brings up something so important here. He's describing the meek man. And listen to this. If he engages in controversy of any kind, his disciplined intellect preserves him from the blundering discourtesy of better, perhaps, but less educated minds, who, like blunt weapons, tear and hack instead of cutting clean, who mistake the point in argument. Here's a bit that I love. Waste their strength on trifles. Misconceive their adversary and leave the question more involved than they find it. And that phrase, waste their strength on trifles, sums it up to me. Because if you conceive of disagreeableness as being somehow the core of what it means to be a man, and you basically stop to fight with any little ankle biter that barks at you as you're walking down the road, then you're never going to have time to get anything big done. This is why if you look at the portraits of Christ in the Gospels, he's not the kind of guy who will be on Twitter constantly replying, well, actually, and trying to have all these debates with everybody possible. He says, go and sin no more, move on, bigger mission to fulfill. So that's what I understand Nick was saying by the fact that you can get distracted from actually building something worthwhile because you're constantly majoring in the minors. There's that similar image, but in like more pop culture, of eagles don't peck with pigeons. Like imagine a golden eagle just coming down to the middle of a city street and fighting all the pigeons and being surrounded by just a bloodbath of thousands of pigeon corpses. Like, you don't want to be the male equivalent of that as a man. Like, yeah, he's look how great he is. He really showed all those guys who'd never read a book just what's up. There's no point.
Yeah. Two excellent reflections. I want to bring in the subject of women on this in marriage and disagreeability in marriage and that sort of thing. So I've been contemplating in the last week or so how, I've said femininity is the primary concern basically that I have in finding a woman. It's primary over virtue, because I think virtue can be trained more easily than femininity. It's a lot easier to go to confession and stop certain behaviors than it is to completely excise the mind virus of feminism from most women today. But the marker of whether or not a woman is feminine, I believe, is she friendly? A woman is supposed to be the man's best friend, not dogs. It's supposed to be the woman, is his confidant, his lieutenant, made from his rib to guard his heart. And so many intersexual dynamics that I see today are acrimonious constantly. Now, granted, a lot of that's on the internet, but even in person, like I get out, I go play pickleball, I go talk to people, and more often than not, if you encounter a woman, she's likely going to have a disposition of trying to compete with you, make you feel small, be unfriendly, as opposed to not that many decades ago when to meet a woman was a pleasant experience. It made your day brighter to encounter a woman in the wild. It was quite exciting. It boosted your mood. Wow, what a delight it was that she entered my office today, that she walked down the street and we greeted each other. And so as I was thinking about this and prepping for the show, I realized that, Tim, you said the number one rule of feminism is never offend a woman. So how do you terraform, absolutely terraform, the internal dialogue that men have, that culture has, the entertainment, the workforce, the traffic laws? How do you completely overhaul everything, but to put women in charge of the soul of a country, of a world, of a culture, such that men are terrified to do anything that might offend a woman, which, by the way, the list is quite long. There's endless things that you can do to offend women. And so...
Yeah, like, how did they pull it off? Or, sorry.
Well, I'm not really... I mean, you and I are going to cover that, hopefully, here soon in a more detailed medium. I was just more reflecting on that it happened rather than how it happened. I mean, we all know that it did, but I thought it was worthwhile to articulate that friendliness, affability, agreeableness, I think, is most complementary to women, and that's utterly absent. And so you and Steph did a really good, very, 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 very long stream yesterday. My goodness, I was 2 hours in, and you guys were on like question 4 or something. I was like, damn, this is thorough. On the canards that supposed anti-feminist Christian women say that are actually feminists. And we were chatting in our group chat recently about guys who say, I just want a woman who will challenge me. So I wanted to get your guys's... Now, Will, you deal with husbands all the time who have wives who challenge their husbands. Would you explain why that's delusional for a man to say, I want a wife who challenges me?
There's a grain of truth to it in that what even the red pill secular writers on masculinity call a shit test has something to it, which is that the woman needs to know that the man can uphold boundaries and that he has integrity. And because women want a man who can't be manipulated by them easily, deep down that's what they truly respect. They want to be told no. They'll actually test to see whether he is that kind of guy. Now, if what the man means is that he wants that kind of challenge, then fair enough. But you don't have to go look for that. That's just built into what these manosphere types call female nature. Like, women are better verbally in many ways than men are. They're often more sensitive emotionally, better at reading body language, especially facially. So when you're interacting with a woman, she's noticing all these things about you. But as a man, to go out and seek a woman on purpose to give you that challenge, I don't think that's the smartest thing to do. There's the Shakespeare play Taming of the Shrew, where Petruchio likes the fact that no other man has been able to conquer and tame Kate, and he sees that as being like a challenge. But that's only so that he can completely break her, basically, and destroy that feminism in her, and then she becomes the most submissive, the most obedient one, and all the other guys with their wives are looking and thinking, how did he pull that off? And he's thinking, well, I've been a great soldier, I go hunting for bears, and now look what I've done too. None of you guys could touch this woman, but I could. So there's some truth to it, but most guys should just be looking for the woman that they can actually handle. I've said before that there's some women will be submissive with some men, but would never be with others. I use the example of Steph even, who I can tell from her book and from what Tim says about her, from what she's like on streams as well. There are some guys who wouldn't have the relationship with her that Tim does. Wouldn't work out. But with Tim, it's fine. So you want to get a woman who's a good fit for you. That's the top priority.
Right. Yeah. Would you guys say that there's, because I don't know, I just don't have the years or the points of data to have an opinion on this. Would you say though that in the last, I don't know, maybe 20 years, it's gotten more the case that there are no Kates anymore, or there are much fewer Kates, whereas every woman now is pre-transformation Kate with no hope of post. They just don't even want to actually be won by a man. They just want to be the man in perpetuity.
This is where the red pill will object to us actually rightly saying, not what about Demendo, as Andrew Wilson always rightly points out, feminists, the moment you criticize a woman will hit you with, what about Demendo? I'm not doing that. Like, no one, I think, has criticized women as a genus more than me, aside from maybe Steph. So I'm not doing what about Demendo. But when you say, where are all the after Kates, aren't they all before Kates? That's a men problem. There are almost no men in the society that have the chutzpah to and the skills and the game spitting, pluck to go and say, I want to tame her. Now, some of these guys that we've talked to, that Will was bringing up in the chat and I referenced yesterday, will say, I want a woman that's not a doormat, like a pre-conversion Kate, who will just rule my life and tell me what outfits to wear, and I'll be this pathetic, dead-eyed, suburban lowlife, which is basically all around us. Leastways in America. I don't know what the suburbs are like. Well, probably the same. But that's a men problem, that there are no men that are like, I tackled wrestling black bear, now I want to wrestle a brown bear, and after that I want to take on Kate and tame the shrew. That's a men problem. That's what I say.
So when I talk to, I agree that there's very few men in society, which is to say there's very few men with fortitude and disagreeableness and frame. They don't know what to believe in, and then they don't know what to defend, and they don't know how to defend it. And I'm desperately trying to grow in all of these ways, and I think over the last couple of years, primarily with the help of your content, I've been able to articulate those categories so I could even start. So you could even start to know, okay, this is the problem, this is where I'm insufficient, and this is what I have to build on. And I remember texting with you and Scott, Tim, about a particular thing in my life where it's like, I know that if I were a more sufficient man, I would behave in this way. And I was like, how do I get there? And I think it was Scott who was like, you just do it, because there's no hack. There's no Tim Ferriss podcast. It's just doing the virtue. Now, supernatural virtues are gifts, but natural virtues are things you have to practice and just do, and do in small ways at a time. And So, my second favorite book of all time is This Is How by Augustine Burroughs. And it's a self-help book that makes fun of self-help books. And there's many chapters in here with pithy titles, like How to Live Unhappily Ever After, How to End Your Life, How to Finish Your Drink, How to Be Fat. And it's a wonderful, wonderful book. But I wanted to read just a very small part of it because, it'll make sense in just a minute. When I was entering adolescence, I was paralyzed by thoughts of how other people were judging me. I was desperately polite. I held doors for everybody, and if someone stepped on my foot, I was the one who apologized. This is not unlike young Nick. In conversation, I couldn't even form my own opinion because if I admitted liking something the person I was speaking with disliked, I would have felt profound rejection, like I was left behind. I could feel this terrible, crushing self-consciousness and do-good best behavior limiting me by the hour. In a moment of mad, brazen inspiration, I thought of something I could do that maybe would help. My worst fear, the single thing that made me sick to my stomach to consider, was being seen by somebody, especially somebody poised, as rude and ill-mannered. But this fear went well beyond the desire to have fine manners. I had come to feel it was rude to not always accept the blame for everything and to agree with others automatically. I simply had to make my worst fears come true. I didn't know how else to stop caring so much about what other people thought of me, if they even thought of me. I had a very bad idea. I climbed onto my bike and rode into the next town, where there was a corner store I had seen, though never been inside. I would now go inside, but I knew I would never come back. As I'd hoped, there were several other customers. I pretended to look at magazines while waiting for a line to form, and soon one did. I lost my nerve several times. Finally, though, I grabbed a pack of gum and cut directly into line ahead of two women. At first, they didn't say anything, but one of them politely told me there was actually a line and they were standing in it. I said something incredibly offensive and stayed right where I was. Lingering after an act of rudeness terrorism had been the whole point. To stand there and feel their anger and disgust boring into the back of my head. To imagine how the swirl of curls would have infuriated them, because when you hate somebody and you're looking at the back of their head, nothing has ever filled you with more contempt than the way their hair brushes the collar of their shirt. I kind of cheated when I got to the register. The clerk had been oblivious to my crime, and I slapped exact change onto the worn old counter and left before he rang me up. Looking back, there were probably other, better ways to do this that didn't involve being rude to other people. I'm not proud of this behavior and wished I had taken the time to think of a different execution of the same concept. That said, the effect was profound for me. It became easier to be less involved with other people and more involved in whatever was happening in the moment. I practiced. When somebody talked about a movie or song and I felt differently, I started to express this. It was about the song or the movie and how they felt and how I felt. That was all. That was the boundary that I established. I did not go beyond this boundary and into the impossible, anxious territory of, they must think I'm uncool for liking that movie. The 5 or 6 years that followed removed what vestiges of self-consciousness remained. I had felt mortified, humiliated, and degraded in so many different ways and combinations by the time I was 19 and working in my first job in advertising. The risk involved in standing up before people and talking about my idea was laughably negligible. So I read that, I think, when I was 19, and the book had a really profound impact on me. And that, as I was doing prep for this show, I remembered that chapter. Because what he did wasn't even sinful, I don't think. Just violating a social construct of a line, I don't even think is venial sin, perhaps at most. And yet, I can imagine, I don't think I have the courage to do that. I don't think I could walk, just cut in line in front of somebody and then just stand there and commit to it, all the way through. Just thinking about that gives me anxiety. Tim, I'm reminded of your anecdote about telling Steph's dad that you hate the Beatles. And
yeah. I think that's an instance where you remove whatever measure of disorder inheres in his story, and you get to the heart of the virtue of disagreeableness. I mean, not to like extol myself, but that was a good instance. I was in the back of my new girlfriend's car, Steph, when we were dating, and he was playing the Beatles, and everyone in the car started remarking, as it was still very customary in the early 2000s. The Beatles still hadn't gone TF away. Now, luckily, now they kind of have. They've been rubbed out by even worse music, but there's some virtue in that. So I volunteered, like, when it was my turn, because everyone was going around saying, I think their favorite Beatles song. And I said something like, well, I don't have one. This is my least favorite band. And Steph, who was, kind of trying to please her dad, was kind of jabbed me, something again she would never do. And I jabbed her back. And then I was like, I'm going to make 2 more comments now. I was like, here's why I hate them. They're the first boy band in history. Okay, that's one. Like that. And Steph learned. She's like, I never do this. Never do this to Tim. Never tell him not to express an honestly held opinion. And I forget what the second fact was. That there's so many. I was like, I want to hold your hand. Great song, right? It's like, don't. If you try to keep me silent, I'll make 3 extra remarks about how sappy and Jejun, I want to hold your hand, as a boy band is.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
so that's a good.
The point of your anecdote and that story is, I think that men who might be pusillanimous or err on the side of that, like I had for many years, would benefit from doing iterations of very small versions of big things, because at some point you're going to have to break up with a girl. You're going to have to negotiate for a raise. You're going to have to pitch yourself. If you want to do anything, if you want to build anything, you absolutely must maintain frame, stand up for yourself, and stand up for the truth. I think, like, you can't even be a good Catholic, a good Christian, and hope to make it far in life if you don't have that. And so it's useful to, if you're not naturally good at it, which it sounds like both of you were, since you were kind of conscious, if it's something you have to train, there might be some utility in doing what Augustine Burroughs did. So I was curious if you guys had any actual practical recommendations for mini battles. Will, you're nodding your head.
Yeah. So if you listen to great businessmen or great athletes talking about how they see themselves, what you'll normally notice is a kind of exaggerated self-image of them. And you get it with guys in weightlifting competitions too. You can hear it in someone like Mike Tyson walking into a boxing ring, that famous speech where he says by the time he steps in, he's a god and no one can touch him. And there's 0% chance that he's ever going to lose the fight. And once you see yourself that way and you start to live it, you realize that what was holding you back before was actually you shortchanging yourself. You're better than you thought, but it was the anxiety that was hindering your performance. So I'll use that analogy sometimes with guys who think that there's no way they can turn their marriage around. You just think, well, other people have done it, so why can't you? You're a normal guy, so are they. They got good results. And what you need to start doing is make a list of all the things you're unhappy about right now, that if you were truly living as the patriarch that you want to live as, you wouldn't tolerate. It would be just unthinkable that your wife would speak to you that way. It would be unthinkable for you to have these habits. And then rank them in terms of how intimidating they are right now to get rid of, and go for the easiest ones first. Let that settle for a bit. Get that new self-image of, I'm the guy that actually doesn't have to tolerate this. And then go for the next one and the next one and build momentum, and it snowballs. And eventually it comes to the point where you getting disrespected by your wife or whatever it might be is as ridiculous to you in your mind as it would be for Tiger Woods to miss a short putt. And once you're in that mental space, then you've got strong frame, and you'll realize that you were massively underperforming compared to what you could potentially achieve. sounds kind of corny, but if you look at how commonplace that is with high performers in all fields, you'll realize that they don't get in their own way at all.
Yeah, the thing that jumped out at me with what you were saying was the belief that it was possible. And I think you both are living examples that it is possible, but for, I think, single young guys, it doesn't seem that way. Like it really does seem mythical that you guys can have a loving family, 7 children, make income, and have wives who are the way that they are with you guys. It doesn't seem feasible, and which is why both of you must be protected at all costs. And this is why they elevate Andrew Tate and they shadow ban, your Twitter accounts, because Tate's not actually saying the full truth. And so, yeah, the belief that it's possible is huge. And I think that's to reclaim the word empowerment from the feminists. This sort of content is genuinely empowering to young men, and I know that because it's empowered me. I think there's been sort of societal trauma inculcated that maybe you guys have escaped, so perhaps you think it's more hypochondriacal to Tim. I know you've sort of expressed this, that like you sort of forget that like wives talk to their husbands in certain ways, or that like girls behave in certain ways, because you guys have just not had to deal with the shit for that long. But I do think that there's been like a few generations, at least 1.5 generations of inculcated trauma of the matriarchy, that, kids going to school with female teachers and, protect female classmates at all costs. Like, don't you dare say something that offends them. And all the way up through the corporate hierarchy, college, and then your first jobs, and all of society is in such a way that you have to, what seems very basic is the most critical. Like, I have to educate myself on the fundamentals, like you're saying, Will, in reverse order of intimidation, so that it becomes natural. And I would imagine maybe you guys could offer some parting shots on this, because we're at about an hour. That I would imagine that once these things are as rote as a putt of Tiger Woods, a lot of other stuff is going to start falling into place in the church as well.
I would just say Mike Robillard, who's a CMASC alum. I mean, we'd never really addressed this on air, but obviously Elliot Holson and Michael Robillard are kind of emeritus members of CMASC. Welcome to come back anytime. Both of them just have other projects going on. They both stepped away, but we're still friends with both of them. All three of us still love those guys, and they're welcome to come back. But Mike was the main one before you arrived on the scene, Nick, who would be the reminder as a single dude. It's bad out there. And he told me on several occasions, because he lived with Steph and I for a month as we finished Don't Go to College, the writing of it together, that is. They're like 4 non-feminist, truly non-feminist chicks, and I met them all under your roof, Tim. And those are the only ones I've ever met in my life. And he wasn't being exaggerative. He's not an exaggerative guy. He's a very intelligent, literal guy. What I said on my show yesterday with Steph was that there's, particularly in Catholic circles, particularly in trad Catholic orbits of Catholic circles, there's a tendency that conforms really readily to human nature, and I do it sometimes myself. It's just, our lives suffer, the quality of our lives suffer because of feminism now, feminism in the church, feminism in the world. And many have remarked the new mass, the Novus Ordo, is effeminate. Yes, I agree. And that's, a depletion of our aggregate happiness by 0.1% or something. But what I offered yesterday on the show is this. if laymen, took control of their own households and become patriarchs, which they are empowered to do, no one's stopping them, like Will just insinuated, and you just insinuated, Nick, then they can reclaim 99.9%, this side of the eschaton, of the earthly happiness we were destined for, we were made for. And instead of pissing and moaning about, your bishop's decision to let you have the TLM or not have the TLM, an element of true the patriarchy of the church, that might be the one thing that you don't control, and you're clamoring for it because it's easier to advocate for making a change that someone else has to make, even if it's scaled at much less gravity. So that's what I would say to men. Make the change that you can actually make. It's much, 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 much more important, 10 to the power of 3 times more important than what Catholic liturgy you go to, even though the other thing matters, and you could do it.
Yep. This comes back to what I said about not majoring in the minors, because it's so much easier. And maybe this comes back to the wasting our strength on trifles as well. It's so much easier to feel like you're busy being masculine when you get into a heated debate with your tweed wearing buddies about what you're going to put in your pipes and how many seconds you're going to sear your steak for. Like, that's all fringe stuff at best. You need to focus on the big things. But the trouble is, although they are simple, they're also hard, which is why people run from them. So really get the priorities in line, and it can be done. And you might need to change the kind of content that you consume online, because I think a lot of it is designed to mentally break men into thinking that it's not even possible. Yeah. And what's that? I'm paraphrasing, but I think Aquinas says that when men give up all hope, then they fall into sin. When you don't even think it's possible, you think, what's the point? Despair follows. And that's the black pill. And it's what the red pill so easily leads to, and I think in practice basically is for most people. So I would say if that's you and you're doubting it's possible at all, just fill all your social media feeds with stuff that makes you believe it, stuff that's uplifting. And then do some small things that exercise your willpower. I like getting guys who are in a funk like this just in the gym, and then seeing that they can make progress through dominating their physical environment. And the weight that used to be something you couldn't lift for 1 rep, oh, hey, look, 2 months down the line, you can do it for 5 reps. Isn't that great? Now apply that to other areas of your life too, including your marriage, including your business life. And you'll see that you can stack wins. And then they see that it's possible, and then we just progress from there.
Yeah, it's the only thing that matters, really. I like the perspective shift that we've covered today. It's not even 80-20, it's 99.9 to 0.1, like you were saying, Tim, that you're not going to control the bishops or what Francis says or anything like that. That I really think that should be the litmus test. Like, before you talk about the church and have hot takes about the church, like, does your wife work? When's the last time she cooked all 3 meals? Are you pleased with her appearance? Are you excited to go home? Just start going through the list of things. If you're answering no to these things, like, stop talking about the church.
The irony, Nick, is that it shows they're actually very proud, and they have a very inflated idea of their own capabilities, that they think that they're going to single-handedly or in a small little band of brothers group fix all these huge problems that are really Christ's to deal with. And it might even take centuries. It's like, hey, guys, this month, next month, we're going to put an end to the Novus Ordo. Like, no, you're not.
Well, shoot, it just slipped out right as I was trying to say that. Tim, were you about to say something?
Yeah, just one view that I consistently harbor, and I want to say it to however many people are listening. It's a new channel, so it might not be tons, but Steph strongly believes this as well. I think you cut yourself short a lot, Nick, in your characterizations. Like, there's something in you that it has always, as long as I've known you, strongly been the guy that you're saying you want to be, where just a massive dude, very, very affable, but disagreeable in all the ways, in most of the ways that it's virtuous, where you could just be pushed against. And I see you do that as a stable, stoic force. Again, but behind the scenes in what you've stood up for in your films, not even topic selection, just the way to interface with people. So I feel like you sell yourself short a lot, and you do a lot of the things that you're like, oh.
Tim, the last point I was going to make was, it seems like with respect to feminism, there's like 4 stages, similar to how Aristotle talks about the 4 stages of living a good life, right? You do bad and it feels good. You do bad and it feels bad. You do good and it feels bad, and then you do good and it feels good. I think there's a similar 4 stages with respect to feminism, and especially like Christians, Catholics on our side of Twitter, where it's their wife's a feminist and they don't know it. Their wife's a feminist and they know it, and they're like, no, that's a good thing. And then their wife's a feminist and they're like, man, I really wish this wasn't the case. And then their wife's not a feminist anymore and everyone's happy. And that progression, you know, a lot of them are stuck in the second, where they're like, no, my wife's a feminist. They don't call it that. And they're like, and all of these behaviors and attributes are a good thing. And so there is some like education that still needs to happen, where you have to convince them, no, actually you're living a gender dysphoric life, and you're letting her sin, and you're sinning by living this way. But the people that are after my own heart are the ones that are in the third category, with getting stories of success on this, and only success. Stop listening to Rollo Tomasi and Destiny and Andrew Tate and all these people. It's just like such a black pill. The grass is so much greener on our side. So any parting thoughts? Was that a good place to end it?
You should make that metric, or we should make that and tweet that out. The 4 states of life with of the 4 states of married life. That's really a great translation of Aristotle's Book 7 in the Ethics.
Thank you. I came up with that after I read it. Never. after I heard you guys list out Aristotle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good, right? Aristotle's so pithy. See, Aristotle sometimes, Scott and I were talking about this, sometimes just pithier than Aquinas. And I have a natural, and the way he frames it as an ancient treatise writer, sometimes it's just drier, terser, but more satisfying to me than the way Aquinas will go super deep on an Aristotelian principle. I really like it because you could kind of massage it in your own brain and come up with little iterations and apply them to your own life, particularly in the ethics.
Yeah.
I just like that.
Yeah, he defined truth in about 20 monosyllables, wasn't it? When a man says of what is that it is, and of what is not that it is not. And then you can have some philosophy PhDs nowadays who can't define it in hundreds of thousands of pages of polysyllabic words. So I think that pithiness is spot on, Tim. Parting short for me would just be, don't major in the minors. There's a whole swath of influencers, particularly Catholic ones today, who want you to believe that you need to worry about your tweed and your tie and your pipe and your beard and all these other accessories. But it's so much easier to accessorize masculinity in that way than to actually do it with the things that matter most. And don't be scared, because God wants you to achieve this. And who are you to decide? Who are you to know best that it's not possible? That's pride.
Beards often hide soy face. I'm quoting you to you, Will, the other day. It's really true. We're all beardless gents, and maybe there's something to that.
It can be true. I did Movember one time, and then by the end of it, because I had a shaved head at the time, people would cross the street and clients didn't like it, especially young kids. They think, who is this guy turning up at my house to chew to me? He looks like a motorcycle thug. So I never really got into the facial hair, especially not just the bare mustache with nothing else.
I'm a mustache supremacist, and that's my. I will bring this back in my lifetime. It will come back.
It's a hard look to pull off if you don't. If you value your time walking near schools, parks, theaters, Chuck E. Cheese's, malls, shopping malls. Very few men can pull off the single mustache without looking like you're on an FBI watch list.
Which we all are, so might as well grow a mustache.
Well, no, I mean a different watch.
Oh, gotcha.
Not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, gents.
Yeah.
Very fun show. Thank you. And we'll see everybody again next Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time.